Welcome to Talk of the Town here on KNSJ 89.1 FM with your host, Mike Aguirre. Our guest this week is Angela DeJoseph. We're also going to have Ann Hoiberg join us later on in the show. Go ahead and take it away, Mike.
Thank you very much, Angela. Good morning to you. I am
Good morning.
looking at you. You look alive and very vital and vibrant, but I'm also looking at your background. And I'm just intrigued by the picture, but more so by what are those on the wall?
Those are Black collector Barbie dolls. Just so I can introduce myself, I am the founder of Women of Color Roar, and so which is an organization that helps young women to learn about running for office, being in public service. And so, as somebody who came up during an age where I did not have Black Barbies when I grew up, and so Barbie was always blonde and blue-eyed. And so when the first Black Barbie came out, now it's been 40 years now, but when she first came out, it was a big thing. And so over the years, they've expanded. And so I collect them. And I have, Barbies that represent African countries, Caribbean countries, and so that's what's behind me.
Okay, so when did the Black Barbies start? When did they come out? And how did you buy them? How did you go about acquiring them?
Well, as a child, we had limited access, so all of we had the same toys, but our toys looked, like everybody else's, but not like us. And so I was already a grown woman when the first Black Barbie came out, which I actually have her, one of the very first ones, which is now a collector's item. But the idea is that representation matters. And so when it comes to people of color not having representation, whether it's on television, in toys, in elected officials, that when you don't see yourself, you don't know that you can be that. And so being able to have representation is what's important.
If I'm out there and I'm a young Black woman, let's say, a young Black girl in junior high or high school or college, or a woman in college, and I think, I really like Michelle Obama. She was really cool, but I don't understand. I mean, I like Barack too. He was really cool too. But why? I mean, are we still in the society where the Michelles are the first lady and the guy is the president? Is that still? And I mean, don't get me wrong. I loved Barack Obama. Okay, but when I read Michelle, when I read her biography, and she said that she had to pick up his dirty clothes and put it on the bed so he wouldn't leave it in the middle of the floor. I thought, here she's telling the president what to do. Okay, so help me with that.
I think that you have to. That's marriage, though. I think that marriage is the two people work it out, and so one person sometimes ends up doing all the stuff. And I think in her case, you're talking about a Harvard educated lawyer who was a professional in her own right. And so it's like, you get to pick up your clothes, I get to pick up clothes. So it's not like, the duties in the household, you're not president of this house.
Let me ask you this. So what is your message if young women out there listening to this and listening to you, what is your message to them about how to get prepared, how to get positioned, what to do if they want a life in public service?
Well, the first thing is always about connections. And that's one of the reasons why traditionally we've been locked out. And I went to visit, the Congress, and I went through the building and went office to office. And one of the things when you get there, you realize their offices are really small. And so, but when you go in each office, everyone is very young and they're also white. And you don't see a lot of people of color. And the reason, there's a couple of reasons. One, you have to have connections. Your mother, knows somebody, your father knows somebody, and you're related to somebody. The other thing is you have to have the financing, because if you're an unpaid intern in Washington, D.C., somebody has to be supporting you. So that means that locks out people in a lower socioeconomic group. They can't afford to send their children and take care of them, during the time that they're doing an internship. So I felt it was important, one, to make the access available so that young women can get a chance to do internships, meet their elected officials. And then the second part is going to be able to raise enough funds. So we became a nonprofit last year, so we can raise funds so that we can start to sponsor, so that we can send them and to Washington, say for the summer, and they can work in an office. So it's really about having access and also having the economics.
Well, how many Blacks are there in Congress right now?
That's a really good question. I'm not sure how many, but I know I can tell you that there's only a few in the Senate, and that there's 0 Black women in the Senate. I know that once Kamala Harris went to the vice presidency, that there was now 0, and she was only the second Black woman.
From the first United States Congress in 1789 through the 116th Congress in 2020, 162 African Americans served in Congress out of 12,348.
Right, but if you look at the districts, you're looking at districts which were traditionally districts that were Black. But what happens is then when you have people that come in and then they constantly change, they which is called gerrymandering, where they change where the lines go. So they end up cutting down on the number of representation that Black people have in Congress.
So, all right, so you have the ability to help these youngsters, young women that are maybe in college and they want to go back and do an internship during the summer, or?
Yes, or all year during the year. So, their internships during the year. Obviously COVID made it difficult the last couple of years, but there still had some where you could even do it online, where you could work with the office, the elected officials, and you could take on projects. So I think it's very important to get the experience and also to make the connections, because when you or even as a volunteer, if you volunteer and you worked in a government office, you get to meet everybody, you get to learn how it's done. And when a job opening comes up, then you have the inside track.
So right now, from the city of San Diego, how many young women do we have in internships in the Congress and in internships in Sacramento?
I don't know how many we have. I can tell you that right now that we have more than we've ever had. And
Okay,
so there are a number now in the office. If you go to the office of our Sarah Jacobs office, you have a young Black woman there. You go to our assembly, you have Black women working in the assembly office. Now that even in a city council now you have it, but they're more now than they've ever been.
Yeah, you have an African American woman on the city council too, Elizabeth Montgomery Stepp. Councilmember Stepp.
No, you're talking about Monica.
Monica, I'm sorry, Elizabeth. Elizabeth Montgomery was an actress.
Yeah, it was
Monica Montgomery
was that
Stepp.
Bewitched? Yeah.
Yeah.
So we have Monica Montgomery Stepp, and she represents the 4th district. And again, she is a perfect example. She, had worked before in the assembly, but Monica is perfectly, qualified to not only be in the city council, but also to actually be the chair of the city council. But she's the pro tem right now.
And she's a lawyer, and she's extremely well spoken, and she has good ethics, and people like her. She's progressive. She's fighting for the public interest against the special interests, so she's really good. Then we have our Secretary of State.
Yes, Dr. Shirley Weber.
Dr. Weber, and then her daughter is in the assembly now.
Yes.
Okay, and then Los Angeles has been blessed with a number of women elected officials like
Karen Bass.
Yvonne Braithwaite Burke.
Yes.
One that I like the most, who's the one that just gives the the Sons of Guns, those white guys, hell every time. She really speaks out.
Maxine Waters.
Maxine Waters, baby, I'm with her 100%. I love her.
Yeah,
She
we
just-
love Maxine. Maxine, the thing about Maxine is that, she tells it like it is and she's outspoken.
Yeah,
But when you come out like that, the way she has, that puts you in really in trouble with a lot of people.
yeah.
And so, she had death threats against her and safety
Yeah.
issues, but Maxine has always been that way, and she doesn't change no matter who's the president. If she is going to speak out, and she's going to work for her community.
She gets those white corporate guys in there and she just spanks them until
Yeah.
they calling her mama. Okay.
Yeah, so Maxine is really good. And now Karen Bass is she's running for mayor of Los Angeles, which is
Okay.
is very
And
exciting.
Marie wants me to remember Barbara Lee. Don't remember Barbara Lee.
Yeah, Barbara Lee up in Northern California. So, Barbara Lee and Karen Bass, both of them are in Congress. And when Kamala, got the nod to go to the vice presidency, there was an opening in the Senate for California. And of course, the Black community wanted her to be replaced with a Black woman because it was then going to be zero. However, Alex Padilla got that position. And so, then our governor nominated Dr. Shirley Weber into the Secretary of State position. But Barbara Lee and Karen Bass both were immensely qualified and experienced.
Well, Karen Bass is, again, very strong, very, reliable and effective. And I don't mean just in terms of being of the Black community, but she is a stalwart representative across the board. I think people
absolutely. And she has
recognize that.
solutions. She's very solution oriented. And, she's been in the grassroots. So she knows what it's like. And she's coming, I think, always from a position of honesty. And she used to be my Congress representative when I lived in Culver City. And I still get her town halls. And she will tell you, how things are and how things are done. And I think part of the thing is that we need more education. The public needs to not just be more involved in the civic responsibility, but know more about how the system works. Because if you don't send enough people to these positions, you are not going to get your district taken care of. It comes all the way down to your district, what money your district is going to get, what things are going to benefit you, your children's, your schools, the money for businesses, the money, so much is contingent on you voting.
So let's talk about you now. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Los Angeles, but my family is from Trinidad in the West Indies. And they came to America in the 50s and to give their children a better life, like a lot of immigrants do. And so, but I moved to Los Angeles when I was young and grew up in Los Angeles.
Is that where mom and dad first landed though? Was in Los Angeles?
No. West Indians, when they come, they land in Brooklyn, New York.
Okay.
If you go to Brooklyn, there's a whole West Indian contingency there. So, they were there. But my mother brought me to Los Angeles at a very young age. But they, all of them land in New York.
So, right, so you get to LA.
Mhm.
And I guess you're a Dodger fan. You have to probably a Dodger fan.
Yeah, well, I was young, and you know what? Actually, as far as sports goes, I really didn't get into sports until I lived in Chicago.
Oh,
And
okay.
I used to go to the Bulls games, the Chicago Bulls,
Oh,
and
all right, there you go.
and people loved the fact that I knew Michael Jordan. And so
Oh, well, let's talk about that. I mean, now
I
you're
know that's.
forget about everything else. Tell us about that.
Oh, I met Michael Jordan when he first came to the league. He was very young, and it was a situation where his fame grew really quickly. And that's something for a young person that's a little difficult to adjust to, because everywhere he went, like if we went out to dinner, people wanted his autograph. You go to the movies, people want to find him in the movie theater and get it. It's very disconcerting, I think, for a young person. And so I think it tends to make them become a little more isolated. And I think you've seen that with a lot of people that grew up in their childhood in the entertainment business.
Well,
But
what took you to Chicago?
I went there for a job. So I moved there to work for Johnson Products Company, which made hair care manufacturing company. and I had been in New York, actually. I had gone to work for Essence Magazine. I was an editor in my
Oh.
20s. I was an editor at Essence Magazine. Then I went to Johnson Products. So
Where-
I
what
kind of
about
took a
school?
little circle.
What about school? We tripped over school there. Where'd you
You know,
go?
I left, I was going to college and I got offered the job at Essence Magazine, and I packed up and I moved to New
Where'd you
York.
go? Where were you though?
I was at I went to UC Santa Cruz, and
Okay, there you go. Little progressive in there.
so, but you know, later
What
on
year
in
was
life,
that?
huh?
What year was that?
I'm not telling.
You're not telling your age. You were there when you were.
I'm not telling. It was a long time ago.
All right, that's fine.
But I will say this, that later on, I went to film school. I went to Los Angeles City College to film school, and became a filmmaker. And so I've sort of had an opportunity to live my dreams that I wanted to do.
Yeah, we got Forrest Gump here. You're doing.
That's exactly who I am. When I saw that movie, I said, that's me.
Okay, so let's talk about Cal State Los Angeles. You know, we don't hear much about that school. I've always had to think in the back of my mind, that's got to be a pretty good school, being right there in the middle of Los Angeles and offering people lots of opportunities. So talk to us about what it was like to go there.
Well, Los Angeles City College actually is really well known for having a really good
City College. You're saying City College.
Yeah,
Okay,
Los Angeles.
okay.
That's actually a lot of filmmakers actually went there. People who are making movies now, because they had all the equipment. So you could go to USC Film School, which I ended up getting a fellowship for screenwriting at
Wow.
USC. Film school. But I went to LACC and did production, and that's where you have all the equipment and you learn how to make films. And, and I know it's, like sounds ancient, but this is before the digital age, where we actually shot on film, and you actually cut the film, and you taped it together, and, but I think that there's something about that hands-on that those of us that came out of that era, that now we can use obviously the digital editing tools, but the skills that we learned back then are still, relevant to how you put together things.
Do you draw on that for your show? I know you've got your own show on KNSJ. Do you draw on that background?
I do. My media background is a big part of it, and then I also was involved in marketing, and so I've learned things about, and that's why the overlap into politics. You really get to understand messaging, and people are always saying, "Oh, the Democrats don't have good messaging." And that's usually true. So, because, you have to really reach people where they are. You have to talk to them in a way that they understand. And you also have to tap into an emotional response. And so that's part of, marketing. And that's an important part of getting people to vote for you, getting people to support your measures.
Mm-hmm. What are you trying to do with your show? What's your objective with your show on KNSJ?
It's really education about from a Black woman's point of view. When I moved to San Diego, it's a small, very small Black population here, but also it was kind of isolated. And so I felt that people needed to understand how we think, why we think the way we do, and it's based on our life stories and our experience. And I think that giving people an opportunity to hear directly, because I've had, Monica Montgomery Stepp, Akilah Weber has been on my show, a number of different elected officials have been on, but you get a chance to hear directly from community members, and that helps to forge understanding. And I think when we find out that we have more in common than we do different with each other, I think that is the harmony that we're looking for.
So talk to me about what are some of your favorite Black women authors?
Oh, it's really interesting that, I actually, I'm one of those people that really got into reading, those novels, to sort of get away from things. And so I do, obviously everybody, loves Maya Angelou, but I also like, fiction and that sort of thing. But I wanted to talk to you today a little bit about what's going on in the Supreme Court, because as you know, we have our first Black woman that was just sworn in to the Supreme Court.
Yeah,
and that is a big deal.
I call her the Muhammad Ali. She's Muhammad Ali, because when they were trying to put stuff on her, man, she was dancing, throwing combinations. They couldn't touch her. They
Yes.
kept trying, oh, she's a pedophile. She likes those pedophiles. That's what they
Oh,
tried
it's ridiculous. But the point is that she, she had to go through that, but she did it with grace. And
Yeah.
that is every day for Black women, though. And I know I've worked in corporate America. I can tell you that no matter what people say or do, we're expected to keep our composure, and we're always and put up with it and smile through it. And it's not easy, but that's what she had to do to get that position. And look at, she's walking into a broken court. I mean, what's going on now in the Supreme Court is a travesty. This is what's going on with them, taking away precedent. I mean, right now, there's a few of the recent decisions that I wanted to talk about. One of them, obviously, is the Dobbs decision, which has now, overturned the right to an abortion. And that decision is so much more, because first of all, you're talking about taking away somebody's right to medical privacy. So imagine, where does that go? At any point, can the government just decide that you don't have the right over your own body to make a decision, whether if you need a kidney transplant or you need something else? I mean, medical privacy is extremely important. The other aspect is that for not only the situation of the fetus, but also the mother, you've got women with medical conditions that cannot carry a baby to term without it being a life or death sentence. And so you're saying to those women that you are not even going to give them an exception, and this idea of sending things back to the states, well, we know states already had in place immediately that they were going to shut down all access to reproductive health care. Then you've got a situation where you've got Judge Thomas coming out and saying, well, they want to look at, also contraception. So you're talking about now you're going to take away contraception, and women will be forced to be pregnant and carry to term. So I think that what's happened is just a travesty, and also the nature of the court turning into this they're sort of an adjunct to the Republican Party now, instead of being an independent body. And I think that that's problematic. The other thing was this decision that they made with the open carry in New York, which was, I think it was, let me tell you the name of this. This was the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association. And this whole idea that somehow you're infringing on somebody's Second Amendment rights, when in fact, when the Second Amendment was written, they didn't have automatic weapons. They didn't have an AR-15 that specifically is made to kill numerous people quickly. And so to use that as an argument, I think it's time for us to say, let's look at these laws and look at what they were written at the time. And so, and then the other one with the EPA, this decision that has to do with the EPA cannot curtail and emissions from power plants. Well, it's called the Environmental Protection Agency for a reason, because it's supposed to protect us. So to tell them that they don't have the jurisdiction to curtail these emissions when we are in a climate crisis. So I'm saying, look at this Supreme Court and look at all of these rulings that are coming out. This is counter to what the people want, because 77% of the women want, not just women, but of the country wants abortion to be legal. So you have 6 people basically making decisions for all the rest of millions of other people against their will.
Well, it's sort of interesting because Thomas is roughly my age, and Alito graduated the year after I graduated. I know Breyer because I had him at Harvard in a seminar. So in a way, I have I look at these guys and I think to myself, now wait a second. Roberts, I don't know what happened to Roberts. He seemed like he was going to be fair and consistent with the good traditions of the Supreme Court. Alito is a Catholic who's letting his Catholicism, and so is Thomas. And so is that woman, the
Tony
contested.
Barrett.
Yeah, I mean, so these are people that, this was a worry, and this, when President Kennedy ran for president, there was a real worry that the Catholics were going to allow their religion to influence their decisions, and he didn't, and most Catholics don't.
And Biden doesn't.
Biden doesn't, but Thomas, I mean, let's look. We look at Thomas. Well, he's black. He's got to be with us. He's black. Come on, he can't be tied up with.
But I think what is you have to understand is that Clarence Thomas, Tim Scott, all of these, just because they're black has nothing to do with their ideology. You have to look, just like Martin Luther King said, you have to judge them by the content of their character. Look at what their fruit.
But
there's nothing black about Clarence Thomas as far as how he votes, how he thinks. And the fact that he wants to come after, these precedent setting, and yet what about loving, he's in an interracial marriage. He didn't mention that. So what about slavery? Should we go back and enslave,
this court reminds me a lot of the Dred Scott court, but what I'm getting at is this. Okay, so when I was in college and law school, there was a camaraderie and we called it the student movement. And it wasn't just something that was ephemeral. It was, if you wanted to hitchhike across the country, you hitchhiked across the country, and people would pick you up. And
I did that. I did that.
Okay, so you know what I'm talking about. So we look at Clarence Thomas and say, well, we went to Holy Cross, and he went to Yale, and he had to be super bright. But I think he was a little bit of an activist when he was in college, but he just seemed. I mean, to me, what that decision on that you can carry a gun around, that to me is very similar to what Trump did when he said, I don't care that those people that are going up to the hill have a gun. They're not coming after me. And it's almost like what he's saying is, I want the people on our side to be able to use the gun in order to intimidate the rest of the population to go along with what we want. And they're just hard asses. Alito, he's a hard ass. He's just, he's one of these Federalist Societies people that thinks that the earth belongs to the dead and not the living. So, I mean, and Roberts, I don't know about. Gorsuch, I thought we had a chance with him, maybe someday. Kavanaugh, I mean, that's about as low as you can go. And then the woman, the woman that you mentioned, what's her name again?
Coney Barrett.
She's obviously just a liar.
But she's not, she wasn't qualified. I mean, if you compare the qualifications that Judge Ketanji Brown, what she had, look at that, so to let this woman in who was questionable to begin with, and now she's definitely going to skew everything through her lens of, it's not just religion, it's extremism. She's something. There's a screw loose there, because why you would get so wrapped up in her Catholicism. Look, I'm a Catholic. I'm wearing the shirt you see today that says Brophy, a Jesuit high school that I went to. I believe in the Catholicism. I totally support our current Pope, but there is no way that I would ever let my religious beliefs in any way, shape, or form interfere with what is good and what is right based upon philosophy and morality and justice and the rule of law and the common law. And it's just so. But you know what? Our newest Supreme Court justice, she will, for decades to come, she will emerge as a major player, and she'll be right in there with Justice Kagan and Justice Sotomayor. And if you read the dissent, such a beautiful dissent. And we've got Justice Breyer, we got our Supreme Court justice in there. I don't know what we do with the Supreme Court, though, because what do you do when the Republicans were in power and they didn't let President Obama appoint someone? They said, "Oh,
It's only a year left. Okay, let me just correct the record. John Adams had been voted out of office. He went in December to the lame duck Congress that had also been voted out of office because the Republicans back then, Thomas Jefferson Republicans, were equivalent to Democrats today. They were voted out of office. John Adams appointed to be the Chief Justice John Marshall as Adams was literally leaving town, and he was confirmed. And John Marshall was one of the longest serving Chief Justices in the history of the court. Fast forward, we don't want to appoint a justice because there's only a year left in President Obama's term. That was hogwash.
Oh, absolutely.
Now, but here's a problem. The great John Rawls, the man that did such a great job in writing the book Justice, and he's not a greatest good for the greatest number of person. He's a person who believes deeply in the idea of fundamental fairness, and he writes about something called the original position. And for him, the original position is you design the system of justice, but you don't know where you are in it. Like I cut the cake, and then you can select which side. And so when we look at our system of justice today, we got to think, what do we do? I mean, do we get rid of the filibuster? Do we try to change the court in some way? Do we bring these justices who lied, if they really did, back for impeachment? I mean, what do we do? Or do we just go out and just beat the drum and build up a massive outturn of the vote so we take over Congress big time and take over the governorships? I mean, are there enough of us to do that? Your thoughts?
Definitely, we have to expand the court. So when the Supreme Court was first started, I think there were only 9 district courts, and now there's 13. So I think that definitely, and this imbalance on the court, I think, is bad for our democracy. And I don't know how we could survive if they continue to unravel the Civil Rights Law, the Voting Rights Act, all these, the Citizens United. Some of these decisions have skewed our country away from being for the people. So I definitely think we need to do something about the court. Obviously, we need to turn out the vote. We also have to do something about this misinformation that's being spewed by the press. I have a friend of mine who was listening to One American Network, and she was telling me all the things. And I said, these things are all false. These are all lies. And they just recently, I heard, got taken off of cable stations, but they were putting out false information day after day, just like Fox News does, and people believe it. And we have to do something about curtailing this misinformation to the public. It's if you want to call yourself, entertainment, then you can't be a news show. People have to know. You have to have a disclaimer up that says some of what we're about to tell you is not true.
I love that that show, One American News, and they kind of changed their motif a little bit, but it just, because I think it's okay. This has got to be coming from Russia. Okay, where are these people coming from? Who thinks that way?
Well, if you look at what's on Russian television, you have similar talking points that's coming off of, and then they're running, Fox News over there on Russian TV to say, look, see, America's with us. And I just think that I believe in freedom of speech. I believe in freedom of the press, but I also do think that we need to have disclaimers and let people know fact from fiction, and all of this, this thing where they try to run this balance between both sides. No, it's not. Let's just deal with the truth. Certain things are facts, like climate change is a fact, and and the thing about with going with your religion. Why is it only sometimes? What about feeding people? What about healthcare? What about all the other things that are part of religious beliefs? Why are you not making those a priority?
Yeah.
Hi, this is Marie. I want to weigh in. I think that among other things, once people, you're talking about why don't people believe a certain thing, or that what we're saying about the environment is the truth. I think the way the psychology and the brain works is that once you start throwing out conspiracy theories and fear, it is so easy to get locked into that separating your fears, conspiracy theories that sound like they're right to you, separating that and try to do some critical thinking is not an easy thing to do. We also, in my opinion, have to take a look at how we are wired, and those self-defense measures that are part of our being from Cro-Magnon are that far back. And that's a really tough thing to break through.
Well, here's okay, but you're right, and that's a very good point, Marie. Here's what I was thinking about. Okay, the number of justices on the Supreme Court have been changed 6 times before the current number of 9. Okay, so it has happened, and it happened under Jefferson, and so it's been expanded, it's been contracted. But what I'm talking about is this, and I go back to John Rawls. I don't necessarily want, well, okay, so John Rawls said the original position is you design the system of justice and you don't know where you are in it. So let's say we're designing the Supreme Court. Okay, so how many justices do we want in the Supreme Court? Okay, well, first of all, I have to separate that from, right now, I would like to see enough justices on the Supreme Court so that a majority of the Supreme Court would restore the court to things like what just got wiped out, these last 3 things that just got wiped out. So that's my personal, perspective. That's not probably a good way to organize the Supreme Court under the thinking of John Rawls. So then the question becomes, Angela, how do you reorganize the Supreme Court? Not to take care of today's irritating decisions, but so that it is sustained and endures to be a true source of justice in the future.
Well, I think it comes down to the fact that you have these gerrymandered districts. So people are not having representation in this country based on the numbers that have a certain belief system. So I think that first of all, we need to get back to people being able to vote and get a representative in their area, and that needs to be fixed. Once we truly have the American people voting and having representation, then the justices that get nominated are then going to be approved by people who represent the people in the United States. Right now, you have those justices that are not representative of the way that the people in the United States think.
Angela, I see that we have Chief Justice Martin Elder here. Is he there? Are you there? Okay. Can you chime in?
Thank you.
We have not heard from you. Do you want to talk about this? Do you want to talk about something else? We're looking forward to hearing what you have to say today.
Well, thank you. First of all, KNSJ's anniversary is coming up here July 4th as Independence Radio. And today's program, thank you, Mitch, thank you, Marie, thank you, Mike, and definitely so wonderful to hear from you today, Angela. It just makes the community proud that we are having these kinds of discussions on our local airwaves. Intelligent talk, a university of the air, and this society is in desperate need of these kinds of conversations if we are going to save the last remnants of this democracy, because we are facing some very unless we get ourselves organized and
Martin, you were on mute for a moment. Could you repeat what you said?
You said we are dealing with some very, I think we're going to difficult times.
Very dark times ahead unless we get involved, get out into the streets, but get out also into conversations with each other to change this. And this is just a wonderful example. I do want to take a 30-second plug. On the 16th of July is Pride Parade. Activist San Diego and KNSJ are going to be having a float talking about the issues of the Supreme Court in front of ever so many people, and we want everybody to be out there. But thank you for helping us celebrate KNSJ's anniversary, and I'll pass it back to you and look forward to hear more.
Yeah, for Pride Parade, people can march with the float that we have. Is that right, Martin?
That's totally correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we're going to have, we're going to be broadcasting from there. Mike is going to be broadcasting live.
Okay.
We do want people to come to the table, get on the air with us.
That's what I like to see. Now, look, we've got 11:58, and so Mitch, I guess we're close to being out of time.
Well, we can actually go until 12:18 is what I have
Okay.
set
All
up. So
right,
we'll
that
do it
sounds
for a
good.
full hour, and
All right.
then
Where's
I'll
Ann?
end the
Where's
show,
Ann?
and then we can rebroadcast it this week.
Where's Ann?
I haven't
Ann.
seen her join yet. So, but we're having such a delightful conversation. I guess we can just keep pulling forward.
Well,
I'll try and get in touch with him right now.
That sounds good. So Angela, what do you want to talk about? Because you haven't even had a chance to get a word in edgewise here. And so what would you like to talk about that we haven't talked about today?
Well, what I want to talk about is, I'm glad you asked, is let's talk about allyship. And a lot of times people have this blanket way, and that's why I love the example, unfortunately, of Clarence Thomas of saying, well, what do all Black people think, and why do Black people think? It's like, first of all, we don't have like a conference call once a week where all the Black people get on it and we make a decision of what we think. We're all individuals. We have different upbringings, different religions, different belief systems. So there's no monolith here. But what we do have that brings us together is we have been subjected to racism based on the color of our skin, and that connects us to each other, and that experience. And recently in California, we have a commission that is studying reparations, and they just released a 500-page report. And what it does is it explains all of the things that happen systematically that have put Black people in this country behind. One of the things was redlining and not being able to buy property in certain areas. The other thing is not having the exact same credit score, everything, the same factors, but not being able to get a loan. All of these things throughout the years that kept Black people from having multi-generational wealth. So I think when I say about allyship, it's not just having a Black Lives Matter bumper sticker. It's about really showing up and supporting the issues that are important to our community.
Okay, so if I were to say, well, what do white people think about Alito? I mean, that would sound ridiculous, right?
Right. Yeah, but people ask me all the time, well, Angela, why do Black people think this or why? And I'm like, I don't know. Do you want me to call all of them and ask them? I don't know. But I can tell you what I think. And I can tell you based on my experience of having been Black my whole life, what I think. And so that's, but I think what's important, like I said, is the collective thing that's happened to us throughout history, especially in this country, of facing racism. Even though my parents were not born here, they still dealt with racism in this country, which meant that they had a harder life than somebody who had of equal stature. And that's something that happens even to this day. There's still places where we cannot go. As a child, I was told, I grew up in Los Angeles, they were like, do not go to Orange County after 6 p.m. You will get hurt. When I went to Chicago, I was told, you cannot go in this area, you will be hurt. And I'm thinking, are you kidding me? But it was the 80s. And school children were still being bricks thrown at them in Boston. And we still had the N-words put on a church door in Chicago. So, people always say, well, that's a long time ago. It's not a long time ago. This is recent. This is now.
Did you see where, I think it was Manhattan Beach,
Mhm.
that they
Bruce's Beach.
Which one?
It's Bruce's Beach.
Oh yeah, tell us about that.
Well, what happened was you had, and this happened, this isn't isolated. You had Black families who owned property, and then the government came in and took it away from them. So if you can imagine a place like Manhattan Beach, which is extremely a wealthy area now, to have had that in your family all these years, you would have had so much wealth, but it was taken away from them. And this happened all the time. This happened, people lost their farms, their homes, their businesses. And look at what happened in Tulsa, where the whole town was burned to the ground. And this was a prospering, thriving, Black industry driven city. So, and you see this over and over again. And you also see the situation that happens in the economics where, for example, if you manufacture a product, it has to go through people that will let it be on the shelves. Well, if you're not allowed to get your product on the shelf, you can't sell your product. Another product by a white company, maybe the exact same product, they put that on the shelf, that sells, but you were cut out of that business.
Okay, but all right, so let's do that. I mean, one thing we learned is that, during the COVID is there really is a way to distribute lots of money to lots of people under the right circumstances, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what about that? I mean, do we need to, like Dr. King used to call it a guaranteed annual income. Is that something we need to be looking at?
Well, actually, there's a number of pilot programs, even here in San Diego now, that are, universal basic income programs. And they have found that it changes people's lives. For example, one of the highest mortality rates during pregnant women are Black women. And they find that giving them a universal basic income causes them to have a healthier pregnancy. Because when you're under economic stress, you cannot think well, your body responds in a negative way. So imagine having to carry a child when you're under that stress. So, but I think it's beyond just the universal basic income. I think it's also opening up the doors for education so that you can afford to go to school. So I think free community college is a start. I think free state colleges is a start, is the next area. I think being able to get a college education or training is what's important. The other thing is being able to buy a home, because now, as you know, here in San Diego, it's extraordinary these prices. But being able to own a home is one of the things that leads to your family being secure and having wealth. So I think helping with home ownership and education, to me, are two of the things that I think they need to focus on.
One thing that happened is that we had a bunch of white collar criminals that sold the city a building that they can't even occupy.
Right.
For $128 million.
Mm-hmm.
Now follow my logic on this, if you will. So one of the companies that put this thing together received $10 million out of the $91 million loan that was made that the city had to repay. So he got $10 million out of that money. And then when they wanted to settle it, the settlement didn't go through. But when they wanted to settle it, they said, okay, we're going to allow you to deduct the $4 million that you made, that illegal payment that you made. We're going to allow you to deduct that from what you have to pay us back. In other words, you took 10 million that we didn't know about. You gave 4 million to the city advisor that was advising on telling the city that they should do the deal. They were the city's advisor. You paid him off. And then when you tried to settle it, you wanted us to give you credit for the 4 million just so that you didn't have to pay that back. Okay, now that is not going to happen. That kind of thinking you know, if that would have been a black person, they would be so prosecuted right now. It's just, it's so disgusting. So my question is this. If we can go back and show in history that there was an intentional taking, an intentional, like for example, Georgetown University is doing it right now because apparently land that Georgetown's built on was taken from blacks, or they used slaves or whatever. But isn't that sort of the only way we can straighten out and make fair the conditions under which black people have to, you know, live under? I mean, you know, if you go into Southeast San Diego, it's not, you know, people aren't throwing their hats in the air because of how great the economy is there. You know, if you look at the planning has all low-cost housing, all the community plans, it's all low-cost housing, and with no acreage set aside for jobs. So they want to, so they you know, we have a lawsuit right now against the city to stop it, to stop the city from, you know, you talked about redlining. We want the city to stop drawing the community plans so all the low-cost housings go in the low-cost area, because then it creates hurdles that inner city residents can never get over. Okay. And that's what I'm trying to say is this. On the one hand, we have a group of operators that the city gives $128 million to for a building they can't even occupy, and nobody does anything about it. And on the other hand, we have all these people living in the inner city that don't have opportunities for jobs or anything because they zone them out. They zone any of the areas out. So what about that, Angela? What's going on there?
Well, again, it comes down to voting and access and representation. So if you have all the money and you back a candidate, when they get in, they're going to look out for you, right? And so that's what happens. And one of the things means you need to take money out of politics. That's why we should have publicly funded elections and not have them, you know, have it by who has the most money wins. You know, the person running against Karen Bass in Los Angeles, he spent $40 million in the primary, $40 million to her 3. She said 3, he said 40 million. He's a billionaire.
Where'd he get all his own money?
He's a billionaire. He put his own money, and every other commercial was from him on the air. That is a start. You got to take the money out of politics. The other thing is, you know, those sweetheart deals and everything, you need to have people in place that are actually there for the people. So, you know, obviously the people, they were not looking out for the public good. But as far as, you know, the people that are the NIMBYs, not in my backyard, they don't want public housing in their backyard. It all comes back to systematic poverty. And you've got to get these people lifted out of poverty. And the best way to get them out of poverty is to get people trained and educated so they are able to get good jobs. And also, you know, people did not want affirmative action and set-asides, but how would you ever achieve equity? If you have one group of people that have been denied an opportunity to have a job, how would you ever get equity unless you make an arrangement where these people can get seen and heard and get their job applications processed?
You know, if you go to how to get things done 101, the first thing they're going to tell you is set goals. But don't set goals if that means getting the African Americans equal opportunity. No. Set goals for everything else, but no, we're not going to set goals for getting Black people into college. That's not. We don't set goals. What we're gonna do is we're gonna make a really unfair system, and then we're gonna say, well, you know, you have to, you know, you're not qualified. You're not qualified to get there, right? And I don't say that to be mean, but it's so hypocritical, you know. Now I will say this: if you get the thirst for knowledge, if you're a Frederick Douglass, or if you're like Dr. King from, you know, Morehouse, and or Michelle Obama, you know, who, I love this story. Michelle Obama's aunt, she's living, Michelle Obama's parents are living in the aunt's extra apartment in one of the buildings she owns. So they're not affluent or anything. And Michelle the aunt makes money by piano lessons, and Michelle goes down to take those piano lessons, and they just clash. Michelle and her aunt just clash because Michelle wants to go through the book faster than her aunt says, and they just have this, I'm going to take the lessons, but I don't like this. So it comes time for Michelle to make her debut with a bunch of other kids at a really lovely auditorium in Chicago. And you know what that's like, Angela. There's such support for those kinds of things in Chicago. It's such a high class place. So there she is at the recital in this big auditorium, and all the parents and everybody looking on. And Michelle sits down, and at her aunt's piano, the middle C was used so often there was a ridge in it. So Michelle just had to put her thumb down, and she could feel that ridge. So she knew. But when she got to this special auditorium and special presentation, she panicked because she put her hands down on the piano. She couldn't figure out where middle C was. And all of a sudden, this loving hand comes over her shoulder and takes her hand into her hand, and she puts it on middle C. And that was her aunt. Okay, so you tell me, you can have people like that can fight their way out of poverty in Chicago, poverty communities in Chicago, and rise above because they get the thirst for knowledge. And she went on to Princeton and Harvard Law School and all that. But so many people that could have done that just don't get the chance.
Well, I think, yeah, but I think that that's such a myth, the myth of the super, the Sidney Poitier, if you will, that there's this one Black person that overcame it. Yes, there's always 1, 2,
yes.
3, but you have to understand that you have a lot of different factors, and if you're familiar with ACEs, it's a score that has to do with being traumatized as a child. So you have a lot of childhood trauma.
Absolutely, that's the whole point I'm making. I couldn't agree with you more.
Yes, and everyone. So you cannot say, oh well, why didn't you excel, and why didn't, because you don't know what that person, that individual child went through and why, because you cannot. So you can't put the same expectations. But what you can do is you can at least level the playing field so that even if you don't have the support system of an aunt and a whole family, that you can still be able to get an education. You still will have a meal to eat at home because you're allowed to have food, that you still can have health care, that you can have this public safety net can still be there. So you have a fighting chance in this world.
No, that's absolutely true. And the key here, though, and I think you said it earlier, the key here is if there's some way to give a young girl or a young man who's Black, and we had a wonderful guy on a couple of weeks ago, Mitch, I don't remember his name, but Angela, they were celebrating where these young men over at Jackie Robinson's YMCA.
Yeah, the Blue Heart Leaders. I was there.
I love that. Is that not great?
It was the greatest. It was seeing these young men who get nurtured, they get support, they get mentored, they're able to have academic support. Every single one of them graduated and had scholarships to go to college. That's what I'm talking about. That's
me too. That's exactly right.
Absolutely. That's a model. That is a model that should be.
That's what we need. We need to push the kids from the bottom, where they're from the poverty and the dregs of poverty, need to get behind them and push them up. And then we need the people in these important positions up above to be providing the resources to help pull them up, so we can push and pull, push and pull, and get people up and about, because it'll be a lot more prosperous society and a much more successful society if we bring everybody in to their maximum capabilities and maximum effort behind them, and I think that's true. So do you have something like, tell us about who you're working with now, though, Angela. Tell us about the young women you're working with now.
What we do is this is going to be our 5th year. So Women of Color Roar, we're having our 5th anniversary. We're actually doing it in September this year because we were waiting for COVID to be over. But so we're like, okay, so we can do our 5th anniversary in person, but we're going to do it outside at the Jacobs Center. And what we do is we send out a letter to all of the schools, and they nominate 7 to 10 young women of color that they think would benefit from this program. And then we invite them and we pay for them to come to this breakfast. And they get to meet their elected officials. They get exposed to opportunities for the internships. And as I said, going forward, as we're able to raise money and apply for grants, we want to be able to provide more scholarships to them so that they can go to leadership camps, be available to do internships out of state. So that's what Women of Color Roar does. So we're like in the infancy of where Blue Heart Leaders is. They're just starting, but there's a lot of other organizations that have been on the ground doing this in our community for a long time.
Well, do you feel that you're getting the support that you really would hope to receive here in San Diego for what you're doing?
I do, yes. And the reason that I got the support was it started with the Democratic Women's Club that I went to them and to a board meeting they had, and they asked me, and I told them my idea of what I wanted to do. And so they backed me from the beginning and were my first sponsor. And then they also had the connections to the elected officials. And it was very interesting in the beginning because they had never done anything for Black women before specifically. And I said, look, we deserve to be celebrated. We need to be acknowledged, and we need to have this opportunity. And so yes. And so over the years, I can tell you all the Democratic Congress members have been a part of Women of Color Roar from the very beginning. And then, the city council members. And then last year, Women of Color Roar was Women of Color Roar Day in San Diego. Well, it was Women of Color Roar and Angela DeJoseph Day in San Diego.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, so but both the city council, the mayor, and also the board of supervisors bestowed that honor on us. And they were all present at the event. And I ran into to Mayor Gloria, and I thanked him, for participating. And he says he was like, he couldn't wait for the next one. So all of them have been very supportive. They'd never done this before, but once they saw what I was trying to do and how positive this experience was of Women of Color Roar, and seeing these 100 young high school and college age young women, and how excited and happy they are to meet their elected officials and learn and have this opportunity to be exposed to something like this. So it's life-changing.
Well, listen, let me just say one thing. Mitch, how are we doing time-wise?
We were just wrapping up, and I just want to
Okay.
remind our listeners you're listening to KNSJ 89.1 FM. This is Talk of the Town. And to answer your question, Mike, we're wrapping up the show right now.
All right, let me just say one last thing. If you get a chance, Angela, The Color of Law, A Forgotten History of How Our Government Segregated America, won a Pulitzer Prize, The Color of Law. Angela, it's a pleasure. Angela was so good. She knocked poor Ann out of the show. We got to get Ann back next week, hopefully. And thanks, Maria and Mitch. We'll see you all next week.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure.